so much for taking such an interest in human rights around the world. I'm going to press on. The CCDP was set up after the Punjab human rights community was attacked and violated, and various members were murdered. So it's post-conflict. And tarring, we are working in an area of impunity, as Sean says. Basically, we have a medical project, and unfortunately there haven't been other projects, but we're always happy that if you would come out to India and help us as well. I'd like to thank my friend Baranjit Singh Ghazi, who's an advocate out there. He does a lot of independent work and quite bravely on his own. So with respect to India, what is very significant is that in 1975, India is considered the world's largest democracy. But in 1975, Indira Gandhi declares dictatorship in India. Now it's come to be known as the emergency, but there actually wasn't an emergency. She was locked up for a few days due to corruption charges, and thereafter you have 4 years of literal dictatorship. You have the Supreme Court judges are removed, the opposition is locked up, the press is censored, trade union activists are tortured. What is very significant in relation to the Punjab, which is in the north, I wish I'd sort of shown you a map of India, is that the largest civil disobedience movement opposed to this dictatorship came out from the Punjab, and that becomes quite significant a few years later. From 75 to 84, the Save Democracy movement, which came out of the Punjab, and now focuses on Punjab's autonomy. It's headed up by Janal Singh Bindramoli. It's at a time of quite a lot of racism, which Sikhs face as a minority in India. As Ram Narayan Kumar says, it was quite unjustified demonization of Sikhs, despite them being a minority. So they're portrayed on television as terrorists. You have unarmed Sikh protesters are massacred at various points. You do not see the equivalent of Hindu majority protesters massacred. And Sikhs are actually banned from attending the Olympic-style Ashab Games in Delhi in 1982. This leads to a conflict. In 1984, you see ethnic cleansing of the Sikhs by the Indian state. So in June 84, supposedly to eliminate Bindramoli, Operation Blue Star takes place, and anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000 civilians are killed. Later, when Indira Gandhi's bodyguards, who happen to be Sikh, assassinate her in revenge for Operation Blue Star, you have within 3 days 5,000 Sikhs killed systematically. By the end of 84, you see the start of Sikh militancy for Punjab Khalistan to separate from India. During this time, you have a lot of police and state terrorism is rife. So if we had to give an approximation, anywhere from 60,000 plus or more are tortured as well as killed. Now, the reason we're going into estimates is that, unfortunately, because the human rights community gets attacked, the evidencing of this becomes a problem. The law used in India, TADA, Terrorist Activities Act, this was brought in primarily for the whole of India, but it was used especially in the Punjab, destroying thousands of political dissidents' lives as well as ordinary lives, as KPS Dillon, who was the former head of police, writes in his book. Something like 99% of cases were held to be false. However, because you could be killed in police custody as well as in jail, a lot of people were eliminated. An example of the excess of TADA is Kanwar Dhami. He was 6 years old. When he was arrested, he was the son of a hardline dissident, Dhami, and he was held in illegal detention for about 10 months before being cleared. So onto the paralysis of the human rights community. In 1993, Kulwant Singh was basically murdered. He, with his wife and his baby, they were called to the police station at Sadaropa. They'd gone there to secure the release of a lady, supposedly Simarjit Kaur. It later couldn't be proven that they were called to the police station, but thereafter the whole family were discovered dead in the river. Now, what is interesting is that the Punjab and Haryana High Court Bar Association did challenge what turned out to be a very concocted case, because the police tried to put the case onto a supposed militant. And what you have is basically all the lawyers across the Punjab going on strike for 2 months. So that's about 5,000 lawyers. However, what is interesting is that the five judges member bench, sorry, I'm a little bit nervous, but the five judges bench of the Punjab and Haryana High Court, they refused to even mark an inquiry. So even though lawyers across the region had striked in solidarity that a lawyer had been touched and murdered, it took a long time for the judiciary to come into to actually seek an investigation. Other lawyers who were killed: Dharamveer Singh Kamboke, Bhatti and Jammu. False criminal charges were tended to be put onto lawyers as a form of harassment. So, for example, Advocate Ajit Singh Pangu of Mansa, he faced 24 fake cases. So by the time you were trying to fight these fake cases, you were quite exhausted by the whole process. There was a Hindu advocate who also represented a lot of TADA cases being put onto Sikhs, Lakhanpal, who felt, it wasn't proven, but he felt that his son was murdered by the police because of the sort of cases he was taking up. So I'm now going to go on to non-state actors in the rest of India. Because India has such a high population of poor, it's important to recognise that the first port of call for poor people will be their local village head, the sarpanch, the doctor, if they can get access to one, the school teacher, and therefore lawyers are really in a different realm. So during the conflict in the Punjab from 1984 to 1994, from 1984 to 94, Ram Singh Billing, who was a journalist, he was killed for investigating the police findings. So he was trying to unveil the truth of so-called police encounters. There was a huge outcry from the human rights community. A lot of Sikhs abroad, as well as had pushed their MPs, US congressmen, to write to the Indian Prime Minister, but nothing could be done to really save his life. And Javinder Singh, journalist investigator, he was eliminated. Now, Khalra, he was a very key human rights defender across Punjab, and it took him a long time to put evidence together to reveal illegal mass cremations, because unfortunately, from the human rights community, when atrocities are taking place, people will say, where is the evidence? So it actually took them a long time to put this evidence together and sort of unravel how the police were killing a lot of people in a sort of scorched earth policy. He went abroad and he raised the profile of the illegal mass cremations, and unfortunately the second he stepped foot on Indian soil, he was murdered. What is significant is that the Khalra illegal mass cremations are the only legal acknowledgement within the Indian system of the killings that took place in the 90s. Other non-state actors like Dr. Jalochan Singh, Dr. Jagdev Singh, just with no prior criminal record, happened to be Sikhs. They were killed as the CCDP uncovered, and fratricide, the targeting of young males, was very common. So non-state actors who belong to very elite communities, like Justice Bands, he was known as the People's Judge, even they weren't spared. So Justice Bands, he was arrested under TADA in 1992, and he spent 4 months in jail. You've got Gurdej Singh, former Indian Administrative Services Officer. So you have people from very strong backgrounds and a lot of protection, but even they find themselves under attack. Political prisoners of conscience, like the Khalistan dissidents, they also face a lot of harassment. Simarjit Singh Mann, he was formerly quite high up in the police in 1984 when he resigned. While he was in prison, he was elected as MP, but he found that even once he was released, along with his colleagues, they were facing harassment. So state actors, I've talked about non-state actors, But state actors like the police who refused to torture, they also were targeted. So Bagicha Singh, I met his mother, and he had joined the border security, so he'd become part of the police service. But when he saw a room full of Sikhs who had been tortured, he just did not want to be involved with the police services. So he tried to leave, and as he tried to leave, he was basically killed. There have been a number of articles that have been produced, one being in Harvard Law Review, I will look that up for you, where it's been shown that the Indian judiciary actually slowed down habeas corpus in the courts. So at a critical time when people were trying to use the legal system, were very poor, these were primarily poor people who were sort of facing the wrath of the scorched earth policy. Basically, as they get into court and they need, we basically need the court system to show that their loved one is alive, the Indian judiciary was complicit with the police. In the late 1990s, you've got a ceasefire between the state and militants. However, the Punjab People's Commission, which is what the human rights community wanted after the conflict had ended, it was basically denied by the judiciary. So in post-conflict Punjab, what you see is criminalisation of political dissidents. So political dissidents face torture, harassment, concocted terrorist charges. We've been in a relative peace process, mid-90s onwards, with Khalistan political leaders. Yet, in 2009, you have Manchpur, an advocate, faces 1.5 years in jail, primarily for being an ADPP, Punjab Khalistan dissident. In 2009, Bittu, ADPP, Punjab Khalistan dissident leader, he gives a speech showing solidarity for small farmers who said that they were being forced to sell their lands to a commercial enterprise, and sedition charges are used on him. And in 2011, similarly, you've got ADPP dissidents facing arrest and torture, basically for just standing up for normal human rights within the Punjab, not inciting violence or anything. The wives of these ADPP dissidents have also said that they've been harassed, they've had books seized, literally on the Sikh genocide, and these have been put under anti-nationalist charges. And in post-conflict Punjab, you've also got humanitarian aid workers. They're at risk if they align themselves with the dissident parties. So Jaswant Singh Azad was a British citizen. He had no criminal record in this country. He was known to go across to the Punjab and actually give aid to victims there. However, in 2011, he was arrested under UAPA, which is the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which is now basically the successor of TADA, POTA, and now you have UAPA, and he's soon to be released, but basically this 2 years in prison has probably destroyed him. And Chora, you've got a political dissident. He was a former CCDP member, and he's been tortured twice. There have been very serious charges put on him. In 2012, you've got a young Sikh protester, Jaswant Singh. He basically protested against the death penalty, and he was shot at by police. You do not have equivalents of a Hindu protester shot at. So I want to give you context there. Where victims have tried to litigate, it's been very, very protracted. So this lady, her entire family was killed in the Delhi massacre in 1984. The furniture in her house was used to basically set alight her family. She has gone into various commissions. There have been about 10 commissions following the Delhi massacre. And what's been known is that people who are very high-profile perpetrators are literal ministerial candidates. So the former head of police in the 1990s, KPS Gill, has referred to litigation terrorism. So basically legal initiatives that have tried to be put against the human rights abuses of the state forces have been seen as litigation terrorism, and that is the general flavour right now in India. So just very briefly about UAPA, the new law, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. It goes a lot further than TADA and POTA in terms of going against international human rights. And it's been termed by Dhami as a blanket denial of bail to foreigners. You could be criminalised for terrorist activities. We don't know what that could mean. Your pre-trial detention, as we've seen in various other countries before, your pre-trial detention will just kill you off by the time you will be released. So, and at risk, as Tubman says, are minorities and political activists. In Kashmir, so I'm going to go very briefly around the rest of India. In Kashmir, in the 2002, Mr. Gilani, he's the Delhi bureau chief of the Kashmir Times, he was incarcerated for 7 months under an Official Secrets Act for a document that's downloadable on the internet. And he says that if I could be arrested with all my high-profile contacts, what is happening to people under prevention of terrorism? In Manipur, Chanu has, she's used her body to hunger strike against the Armed Services Act, and the Indian Association of Lawyers actually found it hard to find a lawyer willing to take High Court action to overturn the blanket ban on anybody being able to visit Chanu. In India, 1 in 4 prisoners is tortured. This is very common, and this has a real ramification on how conspiracy charges could be concocted. Arundhati Roy, a famous novelist, has said, obviously in a country that is now verging on fascism, she said this in 2004 in the People's POTA trial, then we've got to make sure that we do something about this. What's interesting is that she also argues that the Indian media is colluding as lawyers and judges have to perform in a public light, but this could be going on in other countries as well. In Gujarat, Dr. Mukul Sinha, he has tried to show that POTA has been used by, on the minority there. And in the UP Roma social activist, she's also proven that feudal landlords have used basically POTA, Prevention of Terrorism Act, to alienate Adivasis, Dalits, untouchables, poor people basically, and force them into bonded labour even. So Jagannath Giri, he's a retired school teacher, he protested against the excesses of the local landlord and he was arrested under POTA charges. So there's, as Agarwal says, a lawyer based in Delhi, there's rising nationalism, unfortunately with a fascist overtone. In a recent case, you have Professor Puller. There was no evidence found. The 133 witnesses produced, nobody could identify him. There is just a confession signed under torture. And despite a split verdict in the Supreme Court, one judge finding him not guilty, he still faces execution. So Ramjit Malani, the former Minister, Union of India, he represented Professor Buller. So in India, one could argue that you do get access to lawyers. Lawyers aren't under fire for representing political dissidents. But the problem is that, unless you're in a conflict zone, but the problem is that non-state actors are very readily attacked. So Ramjit Malani also says that he was a strong critic of TADA. He says, I have no doubt that some judges of the High Court deserve to be impeached, and this is how the poison of communalism has ascended to that level. The domestic accountability for human rights vis-à-vis security is very, very poor. The People's Union for Civil Liberties, comprising of lawyers and judges who are a very strong human rights group for the last few decades, they challenged POTA, and they're saying that India is taking primacy in terms of national security over human rights. An example of sedition charges being used in India is Asim, a famous cartoonist who basically drew some blood coming out of a lion, because you've got lions on the back of a rupee symbol, and for that he was arrested for being anti-nationalist. India, this was in 2004, I do apologise, I need to update that, but in this People's Tribunal on POTA, India was found to be the only member state not to sign to a UN General Assembly resolution that called for an increased protection in terms of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. Thank you.